All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Frankie Flores, Director of the LGBTQ Resource Center at UNM. My pronouns are they and Aiden. We also do have interpreters here tonight, so I'm going to try to be conscious and speak slower because I talk fast. So I'm going to try and honor the fact that we are trying to be as accessible as possible to everybody. I am so excited that you all joined us here today in one of our Black History Month celebration events. Of course, knowing that Black history isn't just subjugated to just one month, it is every month. This panel is titled Being Black and Queer in Academia. We have an amazing panel. I am going to let everybody introduce themselves with their name and their pronouns, and then I will read a brief bio for everybody, and then we will get into our questions. If you have a question or a comment that you would like for our panelists to see, please use the Q&A function. All right, so I will start with Dr. Zerai.
Hi, everyone. My name is Assata Zerai, and I'm Vice President for Equity and Inclusion and Professor of Sociology, she, her pronouns. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Dr. Zerai. And Dr. Belinda Wallace.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Belinda Wallace, Assistant Professor in English, she, her.
Thank you. And Jay Gourdin.
Hi, so I am Jay. I'm a Senior Student Success Specialist with African American Student Services here at the University of New Mexico. I do answer to they and she pronouns, but I have a preference of they and them.
Thank you, Jay. And our graduate assistant, Laz.
Hi, my name is Laz Letcher. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a PhD student in American Studies and Frankie's lackey at the LGBTQ Resource Center.
What's funny is that Laz says that, however, we all know that Laz and Rico and Joe actually wear the pants at the center. But thank you all so much for joining us again. I am going to read everybody's bios, and then we will get into our questions. So Dr. Assata Zerai serves as the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion and Professor of Sociology at the University of New Mexico. At the helm of the Division of Equity and Inclusion since 2019, Dr. Zerai has expanded diversity programming and strategy at UNM. Dr. Zerai's research interests include African women's access to mobile technology, making the work of marginalized scholars more accessible, and environmental justice/health activism. She has published 5 books spanning these topics, the latest of which is African Women, ICT, and Neoliberal Politics: The Challenge of Gendered Digital Divides to People-Centered Governance. Dr. Belinda Wallace is an assistant professor at the University of New Mexico in the Department of English Language and Literature, where she teaches courses in Afrofuturism, contemporary Caribbean literature and culture, Afro-diaspora and Afro-Latinx studies, post-colonial literatures, and women, gender, and sexuality studies. Her research is rooted in intersectionality, and her writings have appeared in Cultural Dynamics, Journal of Canadian Studies, Women, Gender, and Families of Color, and Proud Flesh, New African Journal of Culture, Politics, and Consciousness. Currently, she has 2 forthcoming special issues. The first special issue centers on the teaching Afrofuturism during COVID-19, while the second special issue investigates Black queer subjectivity in the films Watermelon Woman and Moonlight. Dr. Wallace is presently completing her first manuscript, which queers literary reimaginings of Caribbean slave rebellions, political revolutions, and socio-cultural resistance movements through an examination of historiographic metafiction. Her book is under contract with an academic press. Johanna J. Gourdin has been serving students since 2014. As an undergrad, Jay was an AmeriCorps member, resident assistant, SGA VP, and marketer with student activities at Frostburg State. Jay is originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but after serving the students of UNM for nearly 3 years, proudly calls themselves a Balticania. Jay is in their first year as a Senior Student Success Specialist at African American Student Services, where they support student growth through academic advising, programming, and by connecting students to the Black community. The Joy is Vital Art Project and Ashe, our Healing Circle, are 2 of Jay's programs you may have heard of before. Their office is on the first floor of Mesa Vista Hall, and they'd love for you to shoot an email to connect or drop by when the office is open. Laz Letcher, MA, lives on Tiwa Pueblo land in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Laz works at the University of Mexico teaching courses like peace studies and working at the LGBTQ Resource Center. Laz's research focuses on Black transgender history, Black and Indigenous solidarity, and the legacy of white supremacy in addiction and recovery. Laz has toured domestically and internationally with ensembles and as a solo artist. A recent film project, Stages of Tectonic Blackness, is now being shown in museums across the country. So thank you all so much for being here. I do apologize. I need to pull up the land acknowledgement, unless Dr. Zerai, do you have it handy on you? Oh, wait, no. You know, I always think I'm less prepared than I actually am. It's that imposter syndrome, I tell you. All right. Founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia. The original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. All right, so we are going to jump right in. We have questions for everybody, and please feel free to jump in where you feel you need to. So first off, we're going to start with, what drew you to academia?
I don't mind jumping right in. So hi, everyone. I'm going to go way back. As the child of a civil engineer and preschool teacher from Tennessee, I spent my childhood in Middle America and had that peculiar experience of integrating schools and classrooms, walking with one foot in the world of a conservative mainstream environment that disregarded me, and living in a home and going to a church in which I was cherished was a jarring and strange experience for me in my formative years. So skipping forward to my years at a small middle America liberal arts college, fortunately, the white liberal professor who taught my sociology classes and who had worked on Chicago's first Black mayor's campaign presented an inclusive sociology. And so for me, it was never about sort of white fathers and a whitewashed discipline, but the early authors that influenced me were folks like Joyce Ladner and her Death of White Sociology. And I read the work of Michelle Wallace and became introduced to W.B. Du Bois, Anna Julia Cooper, and other formidable voices. And through these voices, I really found a language to talk about those formative years and to understand something about my own biography and where it fits in history. So I found words like racism and structural analysis and feminism to really awaken something beautiful in my imagination. And so I decided to devote my life to not only pursuing justice for those who are often forgotten, but also to teach the next generation how they could use the intellectual tools to pursue their passions. So I have been or aspired to be a scholar activist since I was an undergrad. And I declared my major in sociology expressly because I wanted to use those tools as an instrument for social change. Of course, the traditional sociology that I was taught at the University of Chicago during grad school ran completely counter to my activism. So during those years, I learned to pursue a dual track. First, as a scholar, completing my doctoral program and securing employment after, and also a second track as an activist, organizing for Pan-African unity on campus and in local and global communities. I found that my engagement in both sets of activities was mutually beneficial. My love for voracious reading and writing and connections to communities of practice made me a more informed activist, and my in-depth study and work as a Pan-Africanist influenced my dissertation topic and my research and work to this day.
Thank you. You know, it's always so funny, Dr. Zerai. Every time I hear your story, I'm like, oh my God, I forget, like, well, I don't forget rather, but I think you downplay how accomplished you are. And I always am so like in awe of the work that you've done and continue to do. So again, just a moment of like, I get to work for you, which is amazing.
We get to work together.
Yes. All right. Who would like to go next?
I don't mind. So I feel like, I guess the best way that I can explain how I got to where I'm at in academia now is that like through the K-12 experience for me, school was like a haven from trauma. And the more that I got involved, I mean, honestly, like I unknowingly set myself up to be really involved in higher education and specifically student affairs from like the moment I stepped on campus. I was an AmeriCorps member. And for me, I did that because I came from a family that, you know, we were trying to figure out how we could afford for me to go to school. And my school offered additional scholarships on top of the AmeriCorps scholarship for students that did this program. And so what happened was everyone that I lived with, everyone that I served with was Black. And so I ended up having this really formative Black experience based off of service and volunteering. And I also met like the VP of student engagement and civic engagement and student activities, or whatever the title was at my institution. So my freshman year, I knew a VP. And so I kind of just ended up kind of working my way up through there. So through that process, I definitely saw that other students were doing the same thing. And even in cases where students weren't even knowledgeable of their traumas, I still saw that higher education had a huge ability of really changing around those experiences of those students. And that's kind of the best way I can explain all of my experiences together, is that that's who I'm here for. And any service that I'm doing in higher education is for those kids.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jay.
I can go next. I think my story falls somewhere in between what Jay and Dr. Zerai have shared here this evening. I'm actually quite the accidental professor. I had no intention of becoming an academician in any way, shape, or form. I went to graduate school for quite different reasons, but it was during my experience in graduate school as a TA, because like most people of color in graduate school, your teaching is tied to funding. And so teaching became part of my livelihood rather than a direct career choice. And though I enjoyed it, loved it, quite frankly, I didn't see myself doing it as a career. However, that changed the longer I stayed in grad school and the more I became familiar with Black women's texts that went beyond the Morrisons and the Walkers, or those few who have broken through the literary canon or sits on the margin of the canon. And I actually found it very frustrating that the women that I wanted to read and study were nowhere to be found on course syllabi. And oftentimes were nowhere to be found in our campus library. And so I had to do some digging and unearthing on my own. And so there's a moment of reiteration, I would say, because I think there is always a consciousness about this, but there's a moment where this knowledge that Black women are one of the most understudied demographics in this country, and their knowledges are hard to find, their texts are hard to find, reading stories about their lives are incredibly difficult to access, and I wanted to change that. And so my work has been about unearthing these kind of unconventional epistemologies and giving visibility to Black women, especially Black queer women, and amplifying those voices because of that frustration I experienced as a college student and as a graduate student. Where I grew up, I did not have a Black teacher in front of me until I was an undergraduate. So my entire K through 12 experience was devoid of even that visibility of Black authority in front of the classroom. And so when I got to the place where I need to figure out what I was going to do with the PhD I had just completed, that is the moment where I decided I would go into academia. And that was also the moment I decided that my classroom would have those voices and those texts on that syllabi. And I would offer students what I didn't have, because I do think there's a need and a desire for them. And I do think there are multiple ways to do activism in the classroom, scribal activism, literary activism. And that's, to me at least, is equally as important as being out in the streets. And so that's pretty much why I'm here today. It was an accident, but I think a very happy accident.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And we're very happy about that accident also. You know, I think that when I was reading your bio, I just thought of like 15 different programs I want to work with you at the LGBTQ Resource Center. So thank you for being here. Laz.
Yeah, I'm also kind of an accidental academic. Like Dr. Zerai, I grew up in middle America, just a cornfield in Indiana, very much the fly in the buttermilk. Only Black student in my classes. The first Black reading I was assigned was the very last text of my AP English class, my senior year. So I had no mirrors in my education, but as a result, my basement growing up was pretty much an African American history museum. My parents, just any book that had a Black person on the cover, it was in my hands. So I really read my way to my identity, and that also echoed true when I was in college and I found queer and trans texts. I kind of read my way into existence. I originally went to school for music. I'm a many generation musician, and I wanted to be a music teacher, and I went to a Norwegian school up in Minnesota because I was like, where's whiter and colder than Indiana? I know. And I was the only Black instrumentalist. I didn't study anything not by a white man born before the 1800s my first 2 years there, and I was miserable. I loved playing music. I hated music theory. And I had a really incredible Mexican American music theory professor whose class I failed because I just could not care about theory, who still, he recommended me for the McNair Scholars Program. It's like, obviously, this isn't your bag. I see potential here. And he completely changed the course of my life by being willing to take a chance on me. The summer after my sophomore year, I went to Ghana. I was the first person in my family to go to West Africa since slavery. And that just changed everything. I went there to study music, and I came back wanting to study race and class and gender. My project was actually like, what does it mean to be a Black woman on both sides of the Atlantic? And I failed miserably, which makes sense looking back through a trans lens, and also understanding that Blackness and womanhood are not monoliths. But yeah, I wanted to study gender, I wanted to study race, and I didn't know a program where I could do both. And I just kind of stumbled upon American Studies, and I'd never heard of it. UNM's program was the first one to show up, and it's a happy home where I get to study whatever I want, kind of within reason, and really get to excavate these Black trans narratives that have been here forever. And I try to think a lot of like Sankofa, the Adinkra from the Akan peoples of West Africa, of looking to our past to build for the future. And I just think that we've got some beautiful Black trans futures, and then I can help build them from the classroom and from my computer and from whatever journals will please publish me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Laz. And that was actually a really good segue into our next question of how has being Black and queer influenced your work? Would it be more comfortable if I called on people that might actually, yeah, okay, thank you. I'm gonna start with Jay.
Okay. How is being Black and being queer influenced my work? Well, I guess to kind of circle back to my last answer about like education being a haven for me from trauma, I feel like for so long, I only saw my experience under the lens of having trauma from being queer. And that I think really is indicative of the whiteness of the spaces that I was in. That the first interactions of social justice that I had and any sense of agency that I had to my personhood was about sexuality and was not about race. So race wasn't even being really acknowledged for me in the classrooms that I was in. Or when they were, I was the instructor. I think to an experience, and I very distinctly remember this in AP American history. We got like an assignment where we were supposed to write about the civil rights movement, and I had learned so much in that one class that my assignment had nothing to do with Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or like, and I got demerit points for that. And I was like, excuse me? Like, and I think for me, that was the moment where I was like, y'all are doing this incorrectly. And I will gather you in due time. And so I honestly feel like I'm still here for those reasons. Mostly because, like I said, I really do feel like it's not even just about me. It's like, I just feel like academia is just not going to have these kids confused while I'm around. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Dr.
Oh, I'm so
Wallace?
sorry. Actually,
I'm sorry.
I can better frame that for my work with the Fro specifically. For me, and I'm going to say this, but I don't know if this is 100%. You'd have to confirm with my director before I say this. I believe I'm the first out and queer person at the Fro, and I'm pretty confident that me identifying as non-binary, that I am the first trans person working at the Fro. And so for me, there's like a couple layers of being like visible that I really wanted to make sure that I was hitting, because I know, having been on the other side of being in spaces where I felt like I was the only person that felt like me, knowing that even one person existed like me, how important that is. And so I do try to camp up my queer, but that's just because that's who I am. And then in addition to that, when it comes to my work, I feel like any uplift that I'm doing towards student has to also have a flair or some kind of like, maybe a flair is a word. I'm thinking of like a roadside flair to the queer students. Like, I am here for you. Hello. So whether that's direct programming or, like I said, me just camping it up, the kids will know.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's so important, right? Because there is this assumption, right, of coming into academia, we have to choose one or the other, and we can't be in both spaces. And so I think by you like queering that space, you are modeling, right, that you can have multitudes of identities in this one space, which I think is just really powerful. So thank you for that. Dr. Wallace.
I'm going to piggyback a bit on what Jay said about being visible, because I think visibility is important, and go back to what I said earlier about amplifying voices. And so my work is all about amplifying Black queer voices in the diaspora in general, and in the Caribbean and here in the Americas in particular. And so my work isn't so much influenced by my Black queerness as much as it is just completely informed by it. I think part of the challenge of doing the kind of work that I do is having it recognized, acknowledged, and validated in various arenas. This is not just an academic issue, right? This is a cultural issue still. And I recall when I was doing my dissertation, I wanted to do it on queer in the Caribbean exclusively. And I changed it because there was pushback on that as a valid subject. And so I focused on women and sexuality more broadly. But then there was pushback because I was using Black women scholars to support my argument, and there weren't enough white men or other voices in my dissertation. And at some point, I simply had to say, stop. That this project will cease to be what I envision. And I'm completely compromising not only the integrity of the project, but my integrity as a scholar and as a Black queer woman. And so that was the moment when I realized that this work would have to stand on its own. And as it goes, so go I. And I'm going down with that Black queer ship, absolutely. And I'm very much at peace with that decision, because the result thus far has been great. I've been able to pursue projects that amplify those voices, that put those bodies out there in the fore, and that demands unapologetically, right, that their humanity is recognized, their knowledges are recognized, their right to exist is recognized. And so when I read that question, I was trying to think of an answer, and I was having trouble coming up with one, hence the anecdote, right? But then I realized that there isn't an answer because it's not an influence, it just is, right? It's an essence. And so it's hard to quantify an essence. And so that is the way in which it works for me, that this is more than just reading novels or writing literary analysis. It has a much greater social, cultural, political aspect to it. And that's the impact I want my work to have, right? For people to feel it and not just read it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that distinction between influenced and informed. I think that's a really important scope. So thank you for defining that and differentiating between those. Dr. Zerai.
Okay, I really love what Jay said about putting up a flare. I think that I've done that in my own way since the 1980s, having dreadlocks since that time, and changing my name to Assata to be that signal that not only that I'm safe, but that all of our students are safe, and can be themselves, however that's defined. And so, yeah, thanks so much for saying that. So in terms of the ways that being Black and queer has influenced my work, the first of all, I have to say that, coming from a Black Christian middle-class background, as is the case for many folks from that background and from my generation, it took me a minute to realize, that queerness was a part of my identity. And so, I really didn't realize that until after 2 marriages and 2 kids. And so, it took a while. But, even before I realized this about myself, I always found that I was drawn to queer theory, and especially to queer women of color authors that, you can see throughout my scholarship, I've been very heavily influenced by perspectives from those scholars. Almost immediately after learning about Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism when I was in the 80s, I was drawn to Black feminism and intersectionality, which really fully integrated queer writers. So from my early days of teaching Black feminism and intersectionality in the early 90s, I was always drawing from the work of queer theorists. So actually for me, it wasn't about an identity politics, which in fact, I find that concept to be a bit foreign. It was really more about adopting theories and frameworks that better represented the full experience of being human. Intersectionality for me, inspired by Black feminist thought and including queer theorists, as I've already said, is something I've incorporated in practically every course I've ever taught for almost 30 years and every book I've ever written. So yeah, so in terms of my identity, I have been in the situation in which I've been the only woman, only African-American or queer person, almost every place I've ever been. And in fact, like I said, this has been a typical experience, not just in leadership, but throughout my career. as a Black queer woman scholar, and all the other characteristics and identities in terms of who I am, I've always lived in diverse environments, meaning generally all white, mostly cisgender, straight environments, and have always been considered an outsider. And so what that does is it creates a situation where, with our work, communication is vital. Teaching, you got to communicate, the kids got to understand you. Writing, same thing. Administrative work, communication is vital on all those levels. And what I learned early on is that people saw me and assumed stuff about me and assumed what I was going to say before I even opened my mouth. And so I had to find ways to kind of cut through that. And it's really important to know your audience. And so speaking mostly to scholarly audiences, I've learned that, really relying on the literature, quoting Audre Lorde a lot, and, bringing in those perspectives that maybe they wouldn't respect me, but they would respect what someone else, another scholar has said, has been a way of bringing people along so that I can be more effective in my work.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. I also really enjoyed when you said, being your whole self is a reminder to folks that there are safe places that are safe. And, I really appreciate that reminder, because I think that so often, people come into academia, especially I feel like trans folks in particular, and feel like, where can I be out? How out can I be? And, one thing I will say continuously about UNM is that we have really worked hard to make sure that trans people know that they're not just welcomed here, but that they are included here and that they, belong here. Because I feel like that so often is one of the reasons why trans folks don't access higher education. Laz, going to finish up the question.
Yeah, my puppy woke up, so sorry, but meet Billie Holiday. She's a new addition to the family. I love this question, and it's been, it was a dangerous time to be teaching critical race theory, and I remember going through my CV and wondering if there was a way I could maybe create like a whiter CV just in case. And just looking at what I've written, the courses I've taught, there was no way. It would just be my name and my email address. And just, I have spent my entire life not seeing myself in the classroom, and I don't want any other Black student, queer student, trans student to ever feel that way. I think there's this misconception that Black theory or queer theory only pertain to those groups, but it's the understanding that when the most impacted and the most oppressed groups get free, we all live a little free. Like, people forget that Black Lives Matter was started by 3 women, 2 of them queer, and was very intentionally queer and trans inclusive. And I was just blown away by my students in my peace studies course, because Lord knows my syllabus was queer as possible. It was mostly Black women on the syllabus, and then just being able to weave all of these different movements together and knowing that we don't, to quote Audre Lorde, we don't live single issue lives. And, every day when I go to work, I've got my James Baldwin candle staring at me, making sure that I stay in my lane and lift up my ancestors that made this life possible. I can't not have Black queer work. I hid myself away for the comfort of others for too long, and I am retired from that. I am loud, I am Black, I am trans, and it's up to others to get used to it. I was on a panel at the Women's Studies Conference a few years ago of trans professors, and I was the only person of color, and they said the other 2 were busy during that time slot who were at that conference. And so as I wrap up my PhD, I do have a lot of anxiety of what does it mean to be a Black trans professor when I don't have a lot of mirrors or models or mentors, but I want to be that for the next generation, so I'm going to do it. And Billy will support me every step of the way.
Thank you. I'm actually going to switch our questions around a little bit, because I feel like our conversation is leading this way, and especially when you were talking about having to hide yourself and that, and trying to navigate that space. And so, we want to know who were your Black queer role models, or did you have to choose either a Black role model or a queer role model but did you have someone who was both? And I am going to start with Dr. Wallace on this one.
Actually, I do not know the name or cannot remember the name of my most influential Black queer role model. She was a lawyer from Philadelphia. She came to give a talk just to our class, not even a university-wide talk. My professor brought her in specifically for this Black feminist thought course. And I was struck by a number of things. First and foremost, she was brilliant, but also she was incredibly comfortable in her own skin. And she walked through the world in this unapologetic manner that I just found inspirational and aspirational. And I think that sometimes when we talk about being visible or being out, we forget that being closeted isn't always a choice, that sometimes people have to do it for safety, to protect their livelihood, because simply they are not ready to be their full selves in the world. And I want to be gentle and remember that I was one of those people at a particular time. And this woman came to our class during that time, and she represented what was possible, right? Not in the abstract, not in some literature that I'm reading, because I can say, oh, I love Audre Lorde, and I do, and I love Dionne Brand, and I do. And although she's problematic, I still love Lena Waithe, and I do, right? And so there are a number of public figures out there that I can point to and say that they inspire me, or I admire their work, or I admire them as people. But really, I admired this woman because she was real. She was tangible. She was someone I could talk to, interact with, and imagine myself to be, right? That she represented not just a possibility, but a probability, right? That potential would be actualized, that you could be your true self, right? And still have success, and still have love, and still have all those things you wanted, because as queer people, we're often told that isn't possible, right? That you have to conform, that you have to acquiesce to these standards. And she just bucked that entire system at a time I wasn't so sure that was possible. I wish I could remember her name. I'm glad I can't, because I think in some ways she represents something so much larger than herself.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you, Dr. Wallace. And you know, you touched on something I think is so important when we talk about coming out, right? And acknowledging the realities that not everybody is allowed to be out, and that not every, you know, I was very much of the mindset for the longest time, really inside until I started working at the center, of everybody should be out, because my coming out was so easy. I didn't understand why people didn't come out. And so I appreciate you saying that, you know, navigating our levels of outness is a really unique and individualized experience. So thank you for reminding us of that. Laz.
Yeah, I haven't really had anyone. I think Dr. Zerai is the first Black queer academic I ever met, and I was very excited that first time she walked into the center. I remember we were very nervous and were cleaning a lot, and she came in with her locks and a smile and pointing out our Audre Lorde poster, and I was like, oh, we're gonna be okay. We're all gonna be all right. I distinctly remember reading Zammy, A New Spelling by My Name for the first time in undergrad, and I think I read it in a day, just like could not put it down. I thought I was the only Black queer person in existence. I think my first queer professor was like in the 20th grade, and then I had a Black PE teacher when I was growing up, and that was about it. So I don't lie when I say like I read my way into existence. Like I thought very much like you can be Black or you can be queer. Those things don't intersect. And you know, I was closeted for a long time for that reason. And then when I came out as queer, I was like, I knew I was trans. I was like, I can't possibly come out. Like this Black and queer thing is already too much. I cannot simply add another layer to this. This intersectionality be exhausting sometimes. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of mirrors at all. And I'm kind of that last generation of trans people that had no representation growing up, except for like Jerry Springer, which was not so great. And then the L Word, which was not so great. That's another panel that I think we could all do as well, maybe next month. But yeah, Dr. Zerai is the first person that I've met that fits that category. So I feel really, really lucky to be where I'm at when I'm here. And the new head of Fry is Frank Galarte, who's a brown trans man, and I never anticipated in a million years to have a trans person in my corner in the academic level. So I feel like the tide is turning, and I'm very excited for this next wave because there's no going back, and that's a good thing.
Thank you. Jay.
I'm so glad I was next because I so felt, as a matter of fact, I guess when we're having a conversation about being out, to a certain degree, there were people in my life who I had never came out to as non-binary. And I realized like, oh shoot, like it's just become such a thing where like I don't even think about talking about it anymore, that I realized that, oh, I have introduced this to some folks. And so this past weekend was one of the weekends where I was like, let me do some tidying up on this. And what I said to a family member was that, like, I have known that I was non-binary for as long as I knew that I was queer. And when I think about that in the scope of the classroom, I mean, I do think it's just a different level of feeling invisible. But beyond race, beyond beyond all the other experiences that I knew of feeling invisible, it was very strange to me to even be in queer spaces and still like know that I fit, but not understand why my fit didn't work for me. And I feel like I was really fortunate to be around people in high school that were experimenting with that line. I think them not being Black added additional, I can't do that to it. Because, I understood that there were liberties of personhood that I didn't have access to. And I just assumed that understanding my queerness and my transness was one of them. So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of when I go back to like me being present and really trying to, I guess my thing is not only taking my experience and like projecting that, because I don't think that my experience, like Laz was saying, that like, I did grow up with very limited access to elders that lived my experience. So I had a lot of, I knew of queer elders. I knew the myth of Black queer elders. But the first time that I met a Black non-binary person, it was in my process of picking a college. And I was really fortunate. There was a small liberal arts college, Goucher College, down the street from my high school. And I was deciding, this is how far I have gone as far as my career. I thought I wanted to go to school to become a bookmaker because I loved like writing and reading so much. And the person that I was going to study under didn't use pronouns at all. And I was just befuddled. Like, I don't even understand. How am I supposed to describe you? And the answer to it was just repeating this person's name over and over and over again. And so in some of the conversations recently where I have like kind of explained myself and identity, I do explain that me being present in the way that I choose to be present is a matter of taking up space, because I remember the first non-binary person I know took up the most conversational space that I had ever experienced. And then I realized in that moment that, respecting people's pronouns is so much easier than not using them at all. And so for me, something that I said when I used to work in residence life is, when a student interacts with me, and this is kind of before I really asserted myself about gender, I was like, I stand in place for the next Black femme or them that they meet. So it's not a matter of, oh, you're going to disrespect me because you are comfortable. I don't care about that. You have me confused, and you're not going to have this same kind of misunderstanding with the next Black person that you experience. And that's not a matter of authority, that's a matter of respect. And so, yeah, I feel like I learned a lot from that person. And I hope that they are still taking up space in higher education. I didn't even think about reaching back out to them, but I might do that.
Great, thank you. Dr. Zerai.
So, one of the things for folks in my generation, for Black academics especially, is we learned that, thinking about the difference between a role model and a mentor, because I think the question kind of crosses both. So role models would be like Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, folks like that. Mentors, very, 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 very hard to find. And so what we learned to do in my generation is to mentor each other. Like this person figured out how to do the relationship piece. This person figured out how to get paid, or, all the different parts of being an adult in the world. We had to just kind of mentor each other because we didn't have really people available to us. And, like I came of age during the 80s, and it was a very difficult time. AIDS was really impacting our communities, and people were straight up dying and, being brutally assaulted. And I mean, it was just like going through some kind of war. I mean, it was just really, really just survival was a thing, which it still is now. I mean, let's face it. So it was a lot of kind of mutual mentoring and role modeling, and all of us kind of just as a group trying to figure out bit by bit what we could and sharing that information with each other. So for me, colleagues in the Association of Black Sociologists, sounds like a strange place to find mentors and role models, but yep, we were there. We were here in queer, and we were figuring it out, and the church that I went to in Champaign was led by a bi woman who was married to a woman. And and there was a Black couple there who I was just like, oh, okay, that's how you can do this, in terms of just raising a family and figuring out all the legal stuff. And so it's been almost like, I don't know, trying to put up some puzzle pieces in front of you so you can step on them to move along. And they fall into place at the very time you need them to.
Oh, thank you. And I think that you mentioned mentoring each other, just as a reminder of the ways that we as queer folks just queer normative thoughts like like role models and mentors, and that sometimes we have to become our own role models, and that role model and mentoring isn't even necessarily about age differences, right? It can be each other. And I think that like that's one of the great things, right, about queerness, is that we get to redefine those things for ourselves as how they fit into our lives and how we fit them into our lives. So thank you for that reminder. Um, so have you ever had to minimize your identities to do your work? Um, Heavy topic, but I'm gonna start with Laz, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I feel extremely fortunate that I often joke that like my main job is to be Black and gay, and that's like very true. And I understand that that's like a huge privilege. That's definitely not the case when I was a classical musician. I left classical music because I didn't know what to wear as a trans person anymore, and academia, caught me. Um, I mean, like I was joking about my CV, but it literally is just everything I do is involving the queer community, involving the BIPOC community, and those lovely intersections for those of us that are lucky enough to be both. I think I minimized for sure when I was in high school because it was not safe. In college, I was not super out because it was hard enough to be the Black person on all of the brochures with my viola smiling. Um, and then once I got to UNM, I was exhausted of masking. And like I said, I retired from hiding myself. Like I'm done. And my poor parents, I've come out so many times. They have been so graceful and loving through it all. Um, but I haven't had to minimize myself. There have been times I haven't mentioned my pronouns, for instance, where I just like don't want to go through that explanation and don't want to do that extra labor of explaining my existence in an academic setting, especially. But I thought it was a great privilege to be able to, my very first day of teaching peace studies, say my name, say my pronouns, and model that for my students. And I even asked them, I said, raise your hand if you've ever had a Black professor before. No one raised their hand. I said, raise your hand if you've ever had a trans professor. Again, no one raised their hands. But, I am very, very fortunate that I get to be out and proud with every layer and facet of my being in my work. And I'm really hoping that can still be the case. So UNM, please keep me employed forever. I will do whatever you need. I got my job at this center because I asked Frankie if they needed help weeding one summer. And he just hired me as a grad assistant. So thank you for taking a chance on me.
Well, thank you for asking, because I was like, when you asked, it was such an exciting moment. And don't worry, you will have a job. As long as I'm at UNM, you will have a job. I will figure out money for you. But no, you have a job. So thank you for being at the center. Dr. Wallace.
I love what Laz has shared. I think I'll answer that by returning to the anecdote I shared earlier about some of the pushback I received with my dissertation. I have to say that my chair was absolutely amazing and completely supportive. And she would fight for me on every front. She went to bat for me on every front and completely supported what I wanted to do. So the compromises I was making was my own volition, right? From pushback from other people. And so I could answer that she is probably one of my role models, although she's not queer. But also it was through her that I learned that I wasn't going to minimize myself when I went into this profession, or any profession. So when I would send out my CV or my resume, whatever the case may be, I didn't de-Black it, I didn't de-woman it, I didn't de-queer it. If anything, I made it more Black and more gay and more queer because I wanted, and more female because I wanted people to know who I was coming in. And if there was a problem, I could meet it head on. And if that was a space where I had to minimize who I was, then I didn't want to be there anyway. And we definitely have to pick our battles because there are just so many. It isn't practical to take them all on. But one battle that I wasn't going to pass on was being who I am, and I would put that out front in every way, shape, and form. And of course, it hasn't been completely smooth sailing. I mean, you run into racism and homophobia as part and parcel of our culture, of the very fabric of our country. So you're going to run into those isms and have to deal with the hate. But I decided that I, like so many of us on this panel, I was done making myself small to make other people feel big. I was going to be who, and I am going to be who I am. And if people like it, that's cool. And if they don't like it, that's cool.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it's just, I think it's so powerful to hear that. Jay.
I feel like I have so many different answers to this question because like I said, I think for me being out in non-binary is something that is incredibly new, but in a way that it isn't. I feel like there were moments in time where I did live validly like myself, and I don't know how to explain it other than it feeling like a vacation from the norm. And so there definitely were experiences, and I think that they're kind of speckled throughout my experience in academia, of me living as fully and out as I am and I feel now. So I feel like it's easier to explain the moments when I did feel this valid than it would be to explain the moments when I didn't. I feel like I needed to minimize. But and I think that for me, what I'm coming to more and more is that transness, and that is and I didn't understand that was also valid dysphoria, of just not clicking in social environment, and I think that so much of our understanding of queerness is limited to what we see in media. And what I love about academia is it's the opportunity of living validly, like what Laz was just saying, of being, and Dr. Wallace, being validly loud and clear about who you are. It's so incredibly important. But I should say, to my specific experience, I went to college in rural Appalachia in Western Maryland. Western Maryland is so conservative that it wanted to secede from the state of Maryland because they thought Maryland was too liberal. So like, when we talk about like safety, I understand that I kind of cocooned myself. I also came from an incredibly conservative Christian home. I mean, you talk about like, I know the grandpa theories to some QAnon theories because of that's the environment that I grew up in. And which is like trippy, like hearing like Trevor Noah talk about theories that I knew about. But what I will say is that like, my experience in college was like being able to peek into who I could be, and seeing how much it pissed off people that I didn't care about. And so much of the exploration became, oh, you're mad. Okay. But then I also, to be very specific as well, there was a moment that stands out. I got to go to Uganda, and I got to do some service with some student leaders at my past institution, and Uganda. And I remember this because I was, once again, strange path to student affairs, but I was the president of my GSA in high school. So I remember Uganda being one of the places where you could be locked up for the rest of your life, if not murdered, for being gay, for being trans. And so I talked to people that went before me, and I was like, yo, but these of course were white gays. And I was like, what's it like being gay in Uganda? And they were like, I mean, I'm a white American, I don't have to worry about it. And I appreciated they were transparent. So when I went, I mean, to whatever degree I could, hide who I was, it felt very strange because at the same time, like, I'm back home, like to whatever degree I can be back in Africa. And I'm Liberian. So I made it to Uganda before I ever made it to where my family is from. And I hid, and it hurt. And when I came back, I made like a bitter Instagram post about it. And it was strange because I didn't want it to overshadow the fact that I was able to be a force for, or hopefully be a force for good. And I also look back at that experience and I say, I wish I was able to have been out and been loud. But I also recognize that I would have been asserting my foreignness and my Americanness. And they already called me a Muzungu, which is basically a cracker. And I was very upset by that. Like I said, I am West African, but so now I realize that like the first 2 years that I worked at UNM, I definitely was way more closeted than I needed to be. But I understand the experiences that led me up to thinking that I didn't have the space or capacity to be who I am, as loud as I am. And it might just be that I was in the right place and right time where I am now to be as open as I am, or that the growth that people have on their own kind of led them to where they're at to be cool. But I feel good, and I feel like I could have felt this good for a bit longer than I gave myself.
Great, awesome. And Dr. Zerai.
Thank you, Jay. We have so much in common. We need to have a conversation. So I actually go to Uganda annually to do work with residents in an informal settlement there. So yeah, we definitely need to talk about that. So for me, I generally don't have to minimize my identities. I mean, I've selected my career on the basis of wanting to fully occupy the spaces that I walk into. But Uganda is the one place, as Jay has mentioned, where, because I'm doing this work in the informal settlement, we're trying to help people get clean water and sanitation. It's just like, it's a higher calling than my identity in a way, is kind of how I see it. So, and my focus there is working with women in the settlement, along with other leaders. And I've been able to connect with civil and environmental engineers to bring resources, and not just to bring resources, but my colleagues from my former institution are willing to create technology on the basis of what people need, as opposed to just bringing in, their smart widgets that may or may not work in that setting. And so for me, it's vital, because it's about kind of saving people's lives. But also, I mean, honestly, I haven't been in a relationship in many years, and so it hasn't actually come up. So I haven't been like actively hiding or anything like that. But I have to admit, I don't flaunt my fluid sexuality there. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you also that. So we have a question in the Q&A, and then we have one final question. But the question in Q&A is actually a follow-up for Dr. Wallace. Thank you for your story of resilience. How can we better protect and support Black and queer scholars at UNM, particularly with respect to their chosen research agendas? On the one hand, faculty advisors can and should do this for their students, but are there ways we can better protect the academic freedom of graduate students and junior faculty at UNM?
Thank you for that question. And I love whoever assumed I was the person to answer that, because I think that's actually a question for Dr. Zerai. So I'll give a very brief response, but I'd like to turn it over to her, because I think this is at the heart of the work, right, that you all are doing in DEI. My short answer is it's important to have people in the room, people who don't look like what everyone imagines a professor or dean or VP would look like. And so you want people of color, you want women, you want non-binary and trans bodies in the room, and to give voice to the issues, right? Because this isn't, to echo what everyone has shared, this isn't just about identity politics. And let's be clear, we're not the only ones who have identity politics. White men have identity politics, white women have identity politics, right? Everyone has identity politics, but that is something that we're asked to carry in a way that other people are not. And so again, I go back to the chair of my dissertation and that anecdote. If she were not in the room, right, then there wouldn't have been anyone there to fight for me and to allow me to advance my work and to grow into myself as a scholar, and to make mistakes and understand that my mistakes are no worse than anyone else's who's pursuing a PhD. And so I think if those voices aren't there, if those bodies aren't there, and they're not heard and counted and taken seriously, then we're just going to be spinning our wheels. So having people in positions of power, having people at the table, that proverbial table, is really important. Dr. Zerai, I'm curious as to how you would answer, because I think this is in your wheelhouse.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wallace. I completely agree with everything you've said. I think for our faculty to understand that they have a responsibility to create a space for all of our students, grad, undergrad, as well as our junior colleagues, to flourish, that is our first and foremost responsibility, and that there is no space for academic abuse. And so this idea that somehow, because we don't deserve to be here in the first place, they can just talk to us any kind of way and treat us any kind of way and try to make us feel like we're the worst. And somehow we're supposed to come out of the womb knowing how to write a dissertation, or, whatever it is you're working on. That's not okay, because they didn't come out of the womb knowing how to write a dissertation, even if their parents did have PhDs. No one knows that, And so I think to create a space, a humanistic space, so that the brilliant ideas that we all come to academia with, because we come with those brilliant ideas from childhood even. You have your creative thoughts, your short stories you write as a kid in your journal, and all that brilliance and beauty gets just kind of beat out of us. And so, we've got to put a stop to that, because look at all the brilliance that we're keeping out of the doors, out of the classrooms, out of academia. And that means, that we're not going to know like how to solve the problem of cancer or the problem of lack of water for people, or, all of the big problems that face our society. They will never be answered if people keep us out.
Wow, thank you for that, Dr. Zerai. So we are going to end on a question that we tend to end a lot of these talks on, because one of the common things that we've heard today, and we hear it commonly in like queer experiences specifically, is that sometimes our Black and trans, our queer ancestors, right, they weren't allowed to show up into these spaces. They were excluded from these spaces. They had to be stealth or to be completely hidden in these spaces. So if you could tell your Black, queer, or trans ancestors anything, what would you tell them? What would you tell them? Yes, Dr. Zerai.
I would love to jump in. That's my favorite question that you posed. So can't wait I'm glad we're not skipping it. So one of my favorite quotes is that we are our ancestors' greatest dreams. I smile when I think of the pride that they must have in us today. However, when I think of ancestors actually known to me, my heart actually breaks, because I know a little bit of the pain and disregard that they had to face in their lives. Even as a child, I had a sixth sense about the abuse and sexual assault that some of them endured. My anxieties about our ancestors led me to research topics that exposed the high costs that they paid in their identities, both personally and in terms of wholesale abdication of social and political responsibility to protect our ancestors' lives, their wellness, their bodily integrity by institutions of the state, the medical establishment, and most painfully by Black leaders, both in the US and in multiple African countries in which I've studied. And so as I have witnessed those struggles and the debilitating fear of coming out, as well as the AIDS epidemic firsthand, as I mentioned earlier, in the 1980s in Chicago and other cities in the US. And when AIDS ravaged my friends' communities in South Africa and outed Black, trans, and other queer family were brutally murdered, I cried. But to my ancestors and to those of the past, I say, thank you for surviving. To Audre Lorde, I say, thank you for speaking your truth, because your truth is my truth. And when everything in my upbringing and formal academic training tried to take away the words for me to tell my truth, your writings, your poetry, and your words gave me back the language that I needed to not only tear down the master's house, but to build not a new house for my individual needs, but new compounds and build toward a new society.
Whew. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Zerai. I was moved to light some Palo Santo, so it's not tea, it's actual Palo Santo that is the smoke wafting up. Jay.
I feel like I kind of struggle with this question, and mostly because I recognize that like the language that I have to describe my experience, I know that there are folks that I would look to that didn't even have the ability of knowing themselves the way that I have learned to be able to know myself. And so I guess my immediate thought is to the ancestors that didn't even know to acknowledge themselves. To the folks that did, and maybe in ways that they didn't even know that they were visible and that someone else saw and it sparked them being visible. I am thankful for them and I'm thankful for their experiences. And I have an uncle who never came out, but who definitely knew to tap my shoulder. And I think about those experiences. So I'm just profoundly grateful for my ability to continue to find new ways to get free. And I think that that's the best thing that I could say to anyone that came before me, is that is the question that I'm constantly asking the people that come after me, is that, are you free? Are you good? Have you made to where you need to be? And as a whole, we have a lot more free to get, but are you good? So yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you for that, Jay. Dr. Wallace.
I think I'd simply say thank you. We often say thanks for all that they endured and sacrificed, but I'd also thank them for all that they protected, because as Jay shared, they left us quite a legacy. We may have to unearth it. We may have to read between the lines to access it sometimes, but it's definitely there. And I'm incredibly proud to continue that legacy, to carry on, to figure out how we get free and freer. Or as Janelle Monáe says, free as motherfuckers. I'm all about that. And I definitely am grateful for the path that they've charted. And, I have my machete ready to continue clearing more ground for those who come after.
Oh, thank you. And Laz.
Just yes to everything said before me. I've been crying this whole time. I always expect this question with Frankie's panels, and I always cry. But I've just been ruminating a lot on the fact that for most of Black folks' existence on the stolen land, it's been illegal for us to read and write, and that is my job. And how amazing it feels to be able to share my ancestors' stories. And thinking a lot about William Dorsey Swann, who was born into slavery in Maryland, was the first person to use the label drag queen for themselves, and was arrested for stealing books from a library to teach their drag ball team how to read, and was acquitted by President Grover Cleveland because it is not a crime to teach your people. So I want to say that I will never stop telling your stories. Thank you for the strength, and I'll keep fighting until all of us are free as a motherfucker. If Dr. Wallace said it, I'm allowed to say it, Frankie. So free as a motherfucker.
Oh, I don't care about cussing. So I want to thank our panelists so much for sharing your time with us, sharing your wisdom with us. I especially want to thank Laz for putting together this event. I really also want to thank Laz for willingly contributing to our monthly newsletter, our bi-monthly newsletter. I really, just your words were so profound and amazing. If you are interested in more events that we're doing, please follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter. We hope that you will join us this Friday. We are having a Black History Month dance party on Zoom. We have a DJ who's going to be spinning for us. We'll also have this great visual representation as well. Thank you all so much. And something that Dr. Zerai has reminded me of, do something really nice for yourself tonight. Take care and be well. Thank you all so much.